serious Redditors who have been kidnapped, what was your experience like? Are there things you do now that you would have never done before? Story 1. This happened a while ago when I was 6. I come from a third world country, and at the time, kidnappings were at an all-time high. We lived in a fairly nice neighborhood, no kidnappings there, no theft, great neighbors. We felt pretty safe, and therefore my mom wasn't too worried. Our house was a gated residence, so we had a front yard and backyard. I was out one morning in the front yard playing with some toys while my mom was inside working or cooking or whatever. Someone knocked on the front gate. Me being a dumb child decided to go up and ask who it was. It was this fairly old man who asked for some water. Me being the nice, helping child opened the door and was snatched immediately. I don't particularly remember what happened after that, but I woke up in a compound which I'm pretty sure was far from home. They hadn't done anything bad to me as far as I know, but they did try to feed me food that I didn't like. I was a picky child, and so all I ate was fruit. They had asked for ransom, which to this day I don't know how much it was. They just kept me in a room all day with duct tape on my mouth and ropes around my feet and hands. They did take duct tape off to let me drink water or eat food. Anyways, a few days later, the police busted them and arrested them. They ended up in jail for life, is what I was told. Not too long after that, my parents decided to move to a different country, and now all is well. I still think about what might have gone wrong if they had sold me into child slavery or something. Fairly common in my country. Life resumed after that. I'm as happy as a 20-year-old can be. Nothing really changed. I still don't know why I was kidnapped, maybe for ransom or whatever. In exactly a month, it'll be my 14th kidnapping anniversary. Story 2. So, back when I was around 7 or 8, my family went to visit our home country of Pakistan. Anytime anyone from the USA comes and visits PA, it's kind of a big deal depending on where you're going. Where we visited was a small village of maybe 200 or so people, and so word gets out fast that rich Americans are coming. This makes us targets as people believe we come with pockets full of treasures and gold and money. Anyways, so I'm with my cousin, who at the time was also 8, at a sketchy arcade place. Sketchy because it only had like 3 games, and it was located in the back of a beat-up mini-store, so I'm playing and my cousin tells me it's time to go, but I was so into that game I did not want to go. He leaves and I stayed. As I'm playing, these 2 guys come into the arcade room and just start watching me play and start giving me comments on how good I was, and when I responded back in English, not the native language of Punjabi, so they knew I was an American. Next thing I know, they grab me by the hands and tell me to come with them. All I remember is crying my eyes off while they dragged me in broad daylight in front of other people to some house. Once at the location, an old lady, who I assume was their mother, was frantic and asking who I am and why I'm crying and why am I there. The guys told her to pretty much shut up and threw me into a room. I remember just standing at the door of the room and banging and crying for what seemed like hours, and every now and then they would tell me to shut up or they would hurt me. But I kept crying and banging. After what seemed like many hours, the woman mom opened the door and told me to run home. I ran so fast out of there, but I had no idea where I was. I just ran, and whenever I would see a kid or a woman, I would ask where the arcade was because I knew how to get home from there. Pakistan is notorious for what they do to little kids, especially young boys. Young boys are used for sex and trafficking, and so reflecting back on this incident, I would say I was one lucky kid because God knows where I would be today. Story 3. I was a victim of parental kidnapping as a child. It was terrifying because I knew the situation was wrong, and I shouldn't have been with my mother, but even when I could put together words to say that, I was scolded because, no, that's your mother can't kidnap you. It was one of many events that made me lose all faith in authority figures. Since it happened when I was young, I don't do anything different in my life as an adult, but I do get very annoyed when people complain about having to sign out their kid from daycare and facing any sort of hurdles when taking their kid out of school or daycare early. Familial kidnapping is real and can be as traumatizing, if not more so, than stranger kidnapping. I was lucky that my mom just wanted her sympathy ticket. Story 4. I was 5 years old. A neighbor called me in while I was in my front yard playing. He locked me in his basement for 4 months, tortured me with a knife and a saw, and raped me daily. I don't really remember most of it. I remember on the day that the police came, I heard sirens and him screaming, and he came downstairs with the saw and tried to cut my arm off until they grabbed him. I remember that after a while I had no idea what time of day it was ever, and that when I went outside the sun really hurt my skin. I barely sleep. I've gone to therapy and physical therapy my entire life. My sex life has gone from being very into bondage, sadism, control, etc., to being completely asexual and big swings all the time. I'm paranoid in relationships, and they usually end because I can't keep myself together. Fortunately, I've gotten sober, have a good support network, and found meditation which turned my life around. For reference, I'm male, but I don't want to say how old I am, so I cannot be identified. Story 5. So many horrible experiences in this thread, really brave of people to share. When I was about 7, I was abducted for a short time and sexually abused. I was a sheltered kid because the neighborhood was rough and I was young. Also at that age, I didn't have any friends, so I always played alone. One day, I guess I played too far because I got lost. I had been wandering around for a little while until I was crying because I couldn't find my way back, and some guy was washing his car. I'm 24, and I'm pretty sure he was younger then than I am now. Just about old enough to have his first council house, I guess. He approached me quickly and started asking what was up, comforting me and asking me inside his house so he could call my parents. Like I said, I was sheltered, withdrawn, and I'm on the autistic spectrum a little bit. Back then in the 90s, people weren't really talking about that much yet, at least not in a small town like mine. So the idea of every parent having every other parent's number kind of just seemed logical to me. So I went into his house thinking that he was just going to call my parents. There he molested and raped me, and then he stopped short because a car pulled up outside, which was his girlfriend, fiancé, wife, whatever. He dressed me quickly and threw me against the wall, making all these threats how he'd kill me. He knew where I lived, etc. That was the part that scared me the most. The rest just didn't make much sense and felt weird. His partner came in to find me crying, and he immediately starts acting like he found me and I'm lost. He doesn't really know what to do, cracking jokes and stuff. She was really nice and just took me home and dropped me outside my house. I think it could have been a lot worse if she hadn't showed up. He obviously wasn't expecting her. When I was about 16 and partying a lot, I'd always go out looking for the place when I was drunk to maybe confront the guy, but I never found it, and to be honest, it's very doubtful they still live there anyway. I made peace with it all a fair few years ago, though. TLDR, abducted as a child and raped. Story 6. When I was 20, I was stuck at a party with a group of drunk people and fights started happening, so I wanted to go home. My phone died and I didn't have keys or my wallet on me, so I decided to walk home across town at midnight. I walked most of the way home when I came across a 30-year-old on a bicycle who was chasing another man on a scooter up the road. Little did I know that he was trying to rob the other guy. I walked faster and kept my head down. The guy rode around the block on his bike, then when he knew I was alone, he jumped off his bike and dragged me into a bush at knife point. He tried to rob me, but when he realized I had nothing on me, he decided he would harm me instead. I convinced him that we would be caught at the side of the road and he should come home with me. We walked for what seemed like 40 minutes, and he held me by the throat so I couldn't run. We got to a hill, and I offered to push his bike for him as it looked heavy. I kept the bike between us. We got to the top, and I saw a taxi at the bottom. I threw the bike at him and ran away screaming for help. I had blisters all over my feet, but I didn't care. All I cared about was escaping. He ran away, and luckily they were able to gather enough DNA evidence to catch him. He was recently sentenced to 12 years in jail. I was very lucky. Never walk alone at night. Story 7. Not much like the other stories here, but my ex-boyfriend took me from my parents' home when I was 19. He put me in the trunk of his car and drove off. About 8 hours later, a lot happened in between, including me getting out of the trunk and into the back seat. The police spotted his car and engaged in a high-speed pursuit. He crashed into a tree, served about 4 years, and is now out with a wife and 3 kids. It didn't affect me as much as people expected it to, and I haven't really changed anything in my life because of it. It happened in the past, and that's how I view it. I have the longer version in my post history if you sort by highest. I can elaborate more or provide proof that it happened to me if anybody cares. Story 8. I was forced to march in front of a military vehicle with 20 other people who had been rounded up by the military. We marched and camped with them for 2 weeks and were used as human shields around vehicles and outposts. About 4 of us were shot, and 3 of us died before I was taken to give stitches to some sort of officer who had a gash in his leg. I was able to negotiate my release and the release of one woman who I had marched with, who was also able to pay. I wouldn't say I do things differently now, but it drained the life out of me completely at the time. Any desire I had before that to stay and ride the war out was totally gone. To this day, I have an extremely negative attitude towards war and resent those who start them. Edit. To clarify, the military force I was referring to committed many war crimes and produced many notorious war criminals. Also, a military vehicle is a sort of small, relatively armored vehicle with a turret. Story 9. My father kidnapped me when I was 7, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I lived with my alcoholic mother and her unstable boyfriend. I wasn't physically abused, but looking back, the mental abuse and neglect were very traumatic. Some borderline child called it things. Anyways, my father had visitation rights and picked me up every other weekend. One weekend he came to get me and saw that I had not eaten much. Food was almost always locked away, and my mom and her boyfriend were nowhere to be found. So my father told me, "Pack your stuff." We spent some time hiding out at different places with family, friends, even hotels in Laughlin and Vegas. It was like a mini vacation. I even remember staying at my dad's girlfriend's house when the cops showed up. I hid under the bed while they talked to her. At the end of the day, I never had to go back to my mom's boyfriend's house, and my father won majority custody. I'm not sure how I would have turned out if I had stayed there. Thanks, Dad. Story 10. I was kidnapped in February of this year by a local gang and held for 95 days. Sunlight, fresh air, and real food are what I missed most. The gang had broken into my home last year and stole about $40,000, so the leader thought they could get another payday by doing it again this year. Except this year they only found about $1,500 and some weed. I was let free after 95 days. 95 days of being treated like an animal humbles a person. I've changed a lot. I started 2 legitimate businesses as soon as I was let free. I'm going to leave this country at the end of this year, hopefully otherwise. I am certain this gang will come back for a 3rd time. There's no reason they won't if they've already come twice. I'm afraid of what might happen the 3rd time. Story 11. Right, this will sound stupid because it is. Me and my mate spent 2010 New Year's Eve in Philly. We were partying with a bunch of our friends, but we wanted to go downtown. Additional vital information: we're both Icelandic, completely naive about our surrounding. After walking around the area, going to a whole bunch of strange parties, one college party, one with only black people, which were incredibly nice, one with a bunch of underage kids twerking each other, etc. Right, so we're trying to find a taxi when this guy drops by us and offers us a ride. Mind you, it was 2 a.m. and we were like, "Heck yeah, man, thank you so much." And we jump in the rear seat. He said it would only take 10 minutes after about 30 minutes. In a really strange and shady hood, we figured something wasn't adding up. He then parked the car, told us he was going to pick up a friend of his. About a minute after he left, we were going to run for it, but he had locked the doors with the baby lock, so we're like, "Welp, this is it. This is how it ends." Neither one of us remembers what happened, but we somehow managed to escape and we hid behind some fence. We saw the guy coming back with like a couple of friends and they began searching for us. Being high as all heck and drunk as Irish sailors, we have no memory how we got back home. We didn't remember what street our apartment was at, which part of town, but around 7 a.m. we finally got back. When we told our friends about this story, they all agreed that we were probably the dumbest and luckiest guys they've ever known. Too long didn't read. Accepted a ride from a stranger on New Year's Eve in Philadelphia, locked me and my mate in the car, and we survived to tell the tale. Story 12. I was, sorta, kidnapped by an ex-boyfriend of mine when I was 16. He was waiting for me in the parking lot of my workplace. I had closed and was one of the last people there. My remaining 2 co-workers were in the windowless kitchen, listening to music and cleaning up, oblivious to anything happening outside. I proceeded to turn on my car so it could begin defrosting and went to the trunk to put my bag. I always changed into clean clothes before leaving work since I didn't like to smell like fryer grease. Away. While I was at the rear of the car, my then-boyfriend exited his vehicle, turned off my car, closed my driver's side door, and locked it. Taking my keys was a common power play for him, so I asked for them back and planned on leaving. He got back in his car and I made up my mind to let him go and to call my mother to bring me my spare key. Unluckily for me, I had left both my cell phone and my wallet in the driver's seat, and now my car was locked. I was standing in the bitter midwinter cold in thin leggings and a sweatshirt, in the dark. My ex, who we'll call L, was in his car telling me that if I didn't get in, he would leave me to freeze. To avoid being in a parking lot alone in the cold, in the middle of the night I got in. He proceeded to drive erratically while threatening to beat me and dump me somewhere that no one would ever think to look. He drove for maybe 2 hours to some pretty remote areas around large bodies of water, and I genuinely feared for my life, as I had no idea where I was and no form of identification on my body. L's father was also in law enforcement, and I have no doubts that if he actually would have harmed me, no investigation would have come from it. He eventually took me back to my car, physically shoved me from his vehicle, and threw my keys at me. After that, I obviously left him and got an order of protection. After that experience, I was far more cautious and still feel uncomfortable in situations where I do not have my phone or some sort of transportation easily accessible so that I can get the heck out if I need to. Too long didn't read. I was kidnapped from a parking lot by boyfriend who threatened to kill me and dump my body. Story 13. My sisters and I were kidnapped by our father repeatedly between the ages of 2 and 4. He would take us from our mother, she had brain damage and a serious drug problem, beat us if we made noise and lock us in a closet and forget to feed us for days at a time. Each kidnapping lasted between 2 weeks and 6 months, depending on how long it took my mother to realize we were gone and ask for help. He was a very scary man. He just wanted the money from the state, food stamps and welfare. He also would try to get money out of my maternal grandmother. In fact, she's the only reason the cops kept getting involved in trying to locate him. She had money and influence and used it. I don't remember much because I was so young, but I remember being scared and in pain, and a uniformed cop opening a door and letting light in. I was terrified of being locked in the dark for years after, and sandy-haired men with mustaches still can make me very nervous. I'm 41 now. When I got divorced, my kids were almost the exact same age as my sisters, and I were when the kidnapping started. It was a struggle to keep those old fears in check.